Hello, everyone joining us. Good afternoon. Happy Wednesday, the first day of Black History Month, and of course, this important discussion. Class number 2 on the Energy Academy. We're delighted you're with us. Lots of familiar names. Excellent. Always good to see my friends from Batavia joining us. Ivy Clee from Kane County. Hey, Ben, good old Ben from Naperville, man. Welcome. Alderman Bruno from Geneva. We've got a lot to discuss today, folks, and I think this is probably one of the more, not one of the more, but certainly a topical discussion today, and that is markets and demand, supply, pricing. We've all heard this 1,000 times before, whether it be via the news or our own policy discussions at our respective communities, so I'm very much looking forward to this discussion. My favorite mayor from Richton Park is here. Good to see you, sir.
Morning, Mayor. Good to see you.
Our professor has taken a deep sip of vodka tonic prior to the beginning of this discussion, so
A little early.
This could be entertaining. We've got 28, 29 folks joining us. We're anticipating 31. I believe we should begin out of respect of everyone's time. So please enjoy your lunch. And as always, a warm welcome to our professor, Mr. Mark Pruitt. Mark, the floor is yours.
Great. Well, thank you, everybody. I appreciate you spending your lunchtime with us. I'm just bringing up my file here to share. And if someone gives me the thumbs up, letting me know that
looks good. Looks
up
good.
And operating, great.
Perfect.
Again, thanks for coming for the Lunch and Learn. We do have quite a bit of material to cover today. So this is what I sometimes call a high-speed, low-drag push through a lot of market basics. That's not to discourage you from asking questions. If you have questions, please put them in the chat. We have time at the end, but we'll circle back and answer questions. If, however, something is just really burning and you gotta ask, right here, right now, please go ahead and do so. But we're going to try to get through about 30 slides of content today. So I'm just going to stop chattering and begin. So thanks again for everybody who's with us today. So our agenda for today is first housekeeping, just to get a few items out of the way, announcements and like. Then we're going to talk about some resources. These are things I'm going to be bringing to you every week in addition to the lecture material, and give you some sense of why we're doing that. Then the lecture itself, and then our discussion and questions and answers, that type of thing. So on to housekeeping. Course mechanics. Cheryl has put up a page on the MMC website that has information about the Energy Academy. Cheryl, if I get this wrong, please give me a virtual kick, but looks like you're intending to put up the lecture materials on the site, so you can click through, go back, review, pull down images, go back and review as you like, and it also has information about the program itself. So I think that's great. I don't do web pages and the like, so I'm always amazed when somebody else can. In terms of schedules, I think everybody should have received invitations as well. I know I did for the classes, and just as a reminder, each class is going to be presented twice. And so you can go to either one of those, or you can go and view the recording. So, you've got all those options that you can choose from. That's course mechanics. Cheryl, Edith, did I miss anything?
I think we do want to talk about the what to do if people are seeking a certificate. So Cheryl, I'm going to ask you just to provide that little summary. We've kind of resolved how to handle if you miss a class and want the certificate.
Yeah, so if you're looking to earn the Energy Academy certificate, but you missed the first week of class, or if you're gonna, you're gonna miss like class 2 or class 3, and you won't be able to attend on the Wednesday or the Thursday, we've got the YouTube recordings on this webpage. So if you just watch the recording, write a paragraph about the key points that you've learned, what's interesting, and what questions that you might have, you could just email that over to me, and then I'll mark that you have attendance for that week, because we have been noting the attendance of who's been at these meetings every week. Thanks.
Great. So, you know, as things come up, we'll announce them, but those seem to be the most pertinent issues. In addition, I'm going to be providing you with some readings and something I like to call the website of the week. So each class, I'm going to provide you with links and descriptions of energy-related materials and resources that can take the form of industry reports, white papers, you know, all kinds of different materials. Some of them will be really dense and thick. Other of them will be really approachable. And this is just in response to a question I've received in this class and for others. They say, what are the things that, you know, that I can access online that are free that will help me better understand the energy industry? Basically, Mark, what's your reading list? So I'm just going to start feeding these things out to you. I think all of them are free. They're frequently updated. And I find that it's very helpful to be able to know where to look, you know, when I have a question. So we'll be presenting those to you as well. And then the website of the week is just kind of a neat, nifty thing that I found online that I found helpful. And again, it's just as a resource. This is not to give you homework. If you want homework, I can give you homework, but this is more about building your personal library on how to get more in depth on energy issues or what to pass along to residents and constituents who may have questions. And then, as always, if you have any recommendations on how to improve the course, the class, or anything about what we're doing here today, you know, we're more than happy to receive those and send them to me, Cheryl, Edith, of course. Happy to take a phone call as well. So whatever works for you is good for me. It's your program, so we want to make the most of it. So on to the resources. These are the weekly readings. Now, some of these are really voluminous, so I'm not saying go and read them all, but these are some great places to go to start to orient yourself about the energy industry. So first one is the U.S. Annual Energy Outlook. You see a link there. That's to the most current outlook. This happens every year. There's also a monthly energy outlook that is updated monthly by Department of Energy section called the Energy Information Administration. This is a comprehensive overlook of the U.S. energy sector. So it's electricity, natural gas, everything, right? Transportation fuels and the like. Lots of charts, graphs, data, and I think it's a very approachable study. It also does some projections of energy consumption, emissions, all those types of things going into the future. So kind of a good nuts and bolts, and it's a report that refreshes annually. So it always is something you can get your hands on and learn something. At least I always do. The second is the State of the Markets Energy Primer from our friends at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. This is the primary energy regulator in the United States, that FERC, right? So you'd think that would be Department of Energy. It's not. FERC actually sits beneath the U.S. Department of Energy, and it acts kind of like our own Illinois Commerce Commission, but at a national level. So FERC has a primer that explains how the markets work, and it's a great introduction to thinking about, you know, where do these prices come from? How do we know we have too much gas or not enough petroleum? What is the strategic petroleum reserve? That's what this primer does. And then lastly, the World Energy Outlook is from an international agency called the International Energy Agency that was put together after the oil shock of 1973. It has about 35 members and affiliate members, international. And this publication is annual. And this year's publication actually starts to talk about and examine and make recommendations for the energy transition in different economies in different parts of the world. So not only are people in the United States looking at the energy transition here, but this gives a view into energy transition in parts of Europe, Asia, Africa. And it helps broaden your perspective in terms of approaches, challenges, and different aspects of energy internationally. So these are the three readings for the week. I'll be sharing more as we move on, but I thought this might be a good start for those who really want to start digging in. Onto the website of the week. Some of you might already know this, but Google has a project called the Google Project Sunroof. And there's a link right here that you can just hot link over to it. It's a very simple tool where you, Google says that they've put together their Google mapping and other diagnostics. And essentially you can identify a roof by typing in an address. You see here up here in the picture, that's my house right there in Indiana. And you enter in the street address, and the Google will tell you what size solar array would work for your house, how much energy it would generate on an annual basis, and give you an idea of the cost. And you're always going to need, you're not going to self-design using this tool, but I think it gives you this threshold assessment of whether solar makes any sense for your given facility, be it a home or an industrial or commercial building. So anyway, I just thought this might be a helpful tool to pass along for those who may have residents who say, well, how do I get started thinking about solar? I've heard about solar. What should I be doing? Well, going here might be a good first step in just assessing, how big is big and how relevant this is. They've got some good frequently asked questions, and it's a pretty neutral source. So anyway, I just thought I'd pass that along. Some of you might have better resources that are similar to this, and I'm happy to put them on my list, but this is one that I found to be pretty useful to refer folks over to. So before I get into the lecture, are there, Edith, Cheryl, I don't know if there's anything in the questions that I need to jump on right away.
Nope.
Nope.
We're good. It's just the links, they were not live in your slides, but we'll put them on the website. So we'll follow up on that.
Oh, I'm sorry about that.
I think it's just because it's a Zoom translation thing. We'll get it on the website. So everybody should be paying attention to you anyway.
Okay.
And not clicking around. So we will share those.
Okay. Well, ooh, on clicking around. That's the fun part. Okay. So this week, we're talking about energy markets, right? And one of the threshold questions that I always had when I first came into this industry, and it's something that recurs with regularity, is why does energy cost what it does? Why is it more expensive this year than last year? Why did prices come down? What's driving this? So we're going to really drill into that today, and that's really the main focus of the discussion. So it's about price, right? So there's a lot of context we've got to get through to understand all the moving parts that come to price, but we'll get there. So just be patient and take it in, and any questions that come along, just fire them into the chat. So energy markets have wholesale and retail transactions, right? So wholesale markets, this is just terminology. Wholesale markets refer to transactions between generators and a reseller. And this is a slide from PJM, a regional market manager that is involved in Northern Illinois. And a reseller is a local electric utility company. It can be a retail energy supplier, or what they call a competitive power provider, or an electricity marketer. But the idea here is that the electricity is being sold from the power plant to an intermediary, meaning that the utility isn't using that energy, the retail energy supplier isn't consuming that energy, it's for resale. So wholesale is between the generator and the reseller. Retail is between the reseller and the consumer. So it's important to understand the difference between the two, because they operate differently. They both contribute to cost, and they both have different impacts to consumers. So we'll just leave the nomenclature there. But again, wholesale is from the generator to the reseller. Retail is from the reseller to the consumer. So wholesale markets. Wholesale markets are not really about price. Wholesale markets are about reliability. And that's because this entire grid system, we talked about our regional grids last week. That entire grid system, in order to operate, must maintain within a very tight tolerance, very narrow bandwidth of frequency, right? 60 hertz is the goal, and you see that on the little gauge here. That's perfection. That's what we want. We can vary plus or minus 0.5%, 0.005 on that, and still be in the green zone. You start going further away from that frequency, things start to happen. The system can become unstable. If you go beyond the red zone indicated here, you have a full blackout, right? And a blackout can last for hours, days, or weeks, depending upon the cause of the blackout. So blackouts are to be avoided. We don't like them. They're dangerous. People die in blackouts. That's the bottom line. And the whole orientation of the wholesale market is not to generate a price. It's not to reduce emissions. It's not anything but maintaining reliability. So this is an important thing to bear in mind. Everything we talk about going forward, there's a lot of talk about price, but price is always tied to reliability. So if you are managing a grid, you've got a lot of approaches to ensuring your reliability. I'm not going to read all this to you, but this just gives you a sense of the strategies that a grid manager will draw upon to maintain reliability. So see the first column here as an example. There's the system operation. So they will establish grid codes, how power plants are to operate. They'll establish rules for maintenance, for testing and metering and controls, right? That they'll do that to ensure that when those power plants are needed, that they are delivering what the system needs, right? They can improve renewable energy forecasting so that too much wind energy, too little solar energy can be accounted for, and the rest of the grid can change its operation to account for those swings in variable output from those renewable energy resources. You can have sub-hourly scheduling and dispatch, so they're constantly looking at, okay, what happens in the next 5, 10, 15, and 60 minutes. They can expand their balancing authority, meaning that they can trade electricity or move electricity into neighboring regions to establish balancing. Or they can do strategic curtailment, which is if you get too much wind energy or too much solar energy coming into the system, they can disconnect those generators from the system to prevent a system overload. So that's just this single column of system operation. So you can see it's very sophisticated. All of these have a different cost and a different benefit. So on a daily basis, some of these approaches are going to be used, some of them will not be, but they're all part of the approach to maintaining reliability. So those approaches usually deal with how generation is managed, right? So in this table, we have inverter-based generation, which is wind, solar PV, and storage. And then we have synchronous resources, which are the more traditional types of power generation. So hydroelectric, natural gas, coal, nuclear. And as you see, based on the how they're labeled across this horizontal axis, these are all the different capabilities and reliability offerings that can be gained from each of those resources. So, in the case of a disturbance ride-through need, wind happens to be very good at that. You see that it's listed as excellent. It's a situation where solar might not be really a good resource for disturbance ride-through, mainly because disturbances can happen at night and the solar resource isn't operating at night, right? So every resource, every generator has a different type and a different benefit and a different cost coming into the system. So let's look at what happens when the system doesn't work real well. You may remember that Texas had rolling blackouts a year ago, right? So this is the timeline of how quickly things can go sideways in a grid. You see here the time scale from 1:23 in the morning all the way over to 2:03 in the morning. So 40 minutes in time last February, the grid frequency in Texas, a market called ERCOT, ERCOT, started out pretty close to where it needed to be, near 60. And you see that, at 123, a certain amount of generation capacity went offline. A lot of it was natural gas because the natural gas supply was cut off because freezing temperatures prevented the natural gas wells from being able to move move natural gas into the pipeline system, because when natural gas is pulled from beneath ground, it has a certain amount of water vapor. That water vapor froze, and it essentially caused the pumps not to operate. So no natural gas, no fuel, no generation. So that's the cascading effect. Well, as we went on moment by moment, as demand is growing, right? Think about it that way as well. It's getting colder and colder. People are using more and more heat, and the power generation is actually falling offline. Well, you started having more outages here at 126 and then 127 and all the way through to a point where more and more generation is falling offline for lack of fuel or lack of controls or other reasons. It got to a point where the frequency down here, starting in this pink area, starts to fall below a threshold that was set by ERCOT that indicated that if frequency drops below this 59.4 threshold for a certain amount of time, that the entire ERCOT system can go black, go dark, meaning no power for anybody. So ERCOT used a strategy. It's kind of the tool of last resort. It's not something you want to start with, but what they had to do to keep the entire system from going down, they had to impose rolling blackouts. Rolling blackouts are where you make a conscious decision to turn off the electricity to certain parts of your regional grid. You just turn it off for 2 hours. And in theory, it's 2 hours in section A, and then you bring section A back online and you turn off section B. And then you turn section B back on, you turn off section C. That's the rolling nature of rolling blackouts. No one likes it, and no one likes it, especially when your rolling blackout, which is only supposed to be a couple of hours, lasts for a few days. But far better for that to happen than to lose the entire system because your frequency is not paid. Okay, so a few are going to suffer, of course, but better a few to suffer than everybody to suffer. So that's the challenge of the grid. And this is where wholesale markets are supposed to manage this grid in a manner so that you don't face this type of challenge. So who are these, where are these wholesale markets? So they're regional, right? And mostly they're contiguous, but sometimes they're not. But you see the names here, and you might know some of these names. You might know PJM is the grid operator for what was originally Pennsylvania, Jersey, Maryland, but now is expanded to Virginia, parts of Indiana, and parts of Illinois. Those non-contiguous areas are connected to the rest of PJM through high voltage transmission lines, right? So even though they don't abut other PJM members, they are connected through transmission. MISO, Mid-Continent Independent System Operator, runs from technically into Canada and then all the way down to the Gulf Coast. Mid-Continent ISO and PJM manage the different separate grids in Illinois. PJM in Northern Illinois, so the ComEd system is in PJM, and the Central and Downstate system for Ameren, Illinois, and Mid-American Energy in Mid-Continent ISO. So we're going to talk a bit more about PJM than MISO, but I just wanted to let you know that Illinois is not its own wholesale market. It's actually split between wholesale market. Our municipal and cooperatives, that municipal electric agencies and cooperatives that are located in Northern Illinois are generally also part of PJM. There's some nuance there with, I believe, one cooperative in Northern Illinois actually being connected to Mid-Continent ISO. But that's an outlier. So Naperville, Batavia, my understanding has always been that those are part of the PJM wholesale market system. So within this family of wholesale markets, there are some that are called organized markets. And organized markets, those are the ones that, with the red circles around them, those are markets that have a central operator. And it's up to the central operator to decide which power plants operate and when. Okay, so PJM and MISO are both organized markets. ERCOT, organized market. Most of California and part of Nevada, also organized markets. So what about the others? Well, the Northwest, the Southwest, and the Southeast, they operate on a more of a balancing authority arrangement, and it's also called traditional. And this is where the local utilities organize and cooperate amongst themselves to maintain system balance within their region. So it can be done cooperatively or it can be done on a centralized basis. In Illinois, most of what we do happens to orient towards the organized markets of Mid-Continent ISO, Central and Southern Illinois, and PJM. So let's talk about how reliability is managed in Northern Illinois. And this is my attempt at some artwork. So let me know if this makes sense. So PJM, starting at the top of the graph, is our regional transmission organization, RTO, and they're responsible for reliability. PJM uses auctions, a series of auction processes to select which generators are going to be used to ensure reliability. Okay, so they set the plan, they set the auctions, they're the ones in charge for reliability. So to establish long-range reliability, PJM uses a capacity market. That capacity market selects generators, power plants, that will promise that they will be in operation 3 years from now, and that if they are called upon, they will generate electricity to maintain reliability within the system. So that's the long-range plan for PJM. So 3 years, right? That's it. Doesn't sound very long range to me, but other people have assured me that it's plenty. But that's the longest range kind of market-based plan within PJM from a market's perspective. Nearer term, there's the day-ahead market. PJM uses an auction process to establish which generators are going to operate tomorrow, during which hours and at which price. So that's the 1 day ahead or the day-ahead market. PJM also operates the real-time market. Real-time market is who's going to generate 1 hour from now if what we've secured in the day-ahead market is insufficient, right? Then there's the ancillary market. The ancillary market is who can adjust their generation on a second-by-second or minute-by-minute basis to maintain reliability of voltage within the system, the frequency, I'm sorry. So again, just to review, and this is important because this is how they go about making this selection process, because they're using auctions, is going to have an impact on energy price. So it's really important to really cement this in. PJM is the market manager. They don't own the power plants, they don't own the transmission, but they manage those assets. They manage them to ensure reliability. Their approach is to use auctions. They use auctions to establish which power plants are going to be available 3 years from now, which ones are going to operate 1 day from now, which ones will operate 1 hour from now, and which will operate on a minute, which will adjust their operations on a minute-by-minute basis to maintain reliability. So I hope that helps, but again, kind of key concepts here. The capacity market auction process that PJM uses is outlined here in their schedule document. Every May, PJM, or up until recently when there's been a few problems, but normally every May, PJM runs what's called a base residual auction. And that again is to establish which power plants or demand response operators will be available and commit to providing capacity to the PJM system starting in June, 3 years from now, right? So if you're going to bid in, you have to bid in a volume, you bid in a price. If you're selected, great, you get a contract. You're going to be paid just for being available, right? But if you don't perform, if you're called upon 3 years from now during a really cold winter or a really hot summer, and you don't deliver your 100 megawatts of capacity, you're going to face a pretty severe penalty. So it's not free money. I know some people call capacity markets free money. It is compensation, of course. It's ultimately paid for by consumers, but they have to perform in order to receive a contract, right? That's a contractual obligation. There are incremental auctions that occur between the base residual auction and the delivery year, only on an as-needed basis. So if PJM a year from now says, oh, well, we expect greater demand in the future, they can always come back to the market and purchase some incremental capacity. So that's the capacity market. Here is how the energy market operates for the day-ahead and real-time markets. So I put some ABCs on here to track the process. So for every hour within the PJM system, PJM has an estimate of the amount of energy that's going to be necessary. So that is established by the line at letter A, right? So they say tomorrow at 3 p.m. we need 25,000 megawatts. Great. That's what PJM says they need. All the generators within PJM are obligated to bid into the system for that hour. In fact, they're required to bid in for all hours. The bids are then arranged by price. And in this graph, you see bidder A has a certain amount of volume of electricity represented by the width of the column at a certain price, which is indicated by the height of the column. Generator B, a little bit different. Generator C at a higher price, but more volume. And you see how it goes. There's more expensive generators and less expensive generators. And we arrange them by price. When we line them up by price and their capacity, we identify that so that's B, right? B is where we arrange things by price. At point C, which is where the demand that's required by PJM, as indicated by marker A, is met by the marginal supplier, the last supplier necessary. It's called the marginal supplier. That establishes point C. That's where the demand curve, A, meets the supply curve, D, supplier D, at point C. And that sets the price for energy in that market for that hour in the day-ahead market, or for that hour in the real-time market. So as you can see, think about it this way. If the suppliers probably have pretty much the same prices, the same cost. If you had a higher demand, say, take that pointer for A, move it off to the right, an inch or two. Well, that means you have a higher demand level, which means you need more supply, which means that maybe you need the supply from suppliers E and F and G to meet your demand level to maintain reliability. Again, going back to reliability. And you're going to have a higher clearing price, right? So what this means is you get a different price for every hour. That's called market price volatility. So this happens on an ongoing basis, on a day-ahead basis, on a real-time basis. Every day, every hour, there's a bidding process, yielding a different mix of suppliers, a different price that's set because demand is always changing. So what do you get? Well, for capacity, you get a different price every year. Capacity prices change annually. Therefore, a period that's measured between June 1st and May 31st of every year. They vary by subregion. The subregion that is most relevant to Chicago is the blue line in this graph. And you see the prices go up, they go down, they change every year. That's the nature of a result from the auction process. You also see this in the energy markets. So these are wholesale hourly prices for Illinois, Indiana, and Minnesota. And you see that they track the same type of pattern, but they're actually at different levels, right? And that reflects the local market balance of supply and demand. You see prices going from near zero all the way up to over 100 in the span of a week. So again, market volatility is an outcome of using this auction process to bring about generation, to bring generation into the market to meet demand, to establish reliability. So very sophisticated and ongoing. So those are two elements that I hope you can see as coming out of these wholesale markets. So again, excuse me, the wholesale market is between the generator and the reseller, right? It establishes prices for capacity, for long-term reliability, day ahead and real-time prices for day ahead and hourly prices, and then the ancillary markets for changes that happen on a moment-by-moment basis. So that's what a utility pays, or that's what a retail energy supplier pays, are these variable rates. Let's turn over to the retail energy markets now, which are different, connected, but different than the wholesale market. So the retail energy market, how they operate. So the objective in retail energy markets is price, right? Yes, there's a concern for reliability, but the reliability issues are being taken care of by PJM with their efforts for balancing supply and demand, and by ComEd by ensuring that, you know, trees don't fall on the power lines, right? Or the local municipal utility. So the main concern for retail energy markets is price. This is a copy of a ComEd bill, as a for instance. And within that bill, you see three separate cost categories. One is for electricity supply services. That's for supply, transmission, capacity. You know, everything that's related to the cost of the electricity coming out of the plug. There's the delivery services. That's the charge that ComEd makes for moving that electricity from the wholesale regional substation to that local transformer, and then to the meter in your house. And then taxes and fees. And those are, you know, set by local, state government, and go anywhere from, you know, revenue-based to, you know, program-based, supporting the cost of energy efficiency programs, renewable portfolio standard, and the like. As you see here, supply is the largest part of the bill, then delivery, then taxes and fees. So in the old days, and for a lot of the United States still, the cost of energy was based on a formula called rate of return rate making. So a utility would go to the Commerce Commission and say, hey, for us to deliver electricity next year to all these consumers, it's going to cost $1 billion. And within that, in that $1 billion, excuse me, is their total revenue requirement. That total revenue requirement breaks into expenses on the left, which include operations, maintenance, depreciation, and taxes, and then return on rate base, which is the rate base, the value of all of their equipment, right? Power plants, power lines, substations, you know, trucks, equipment, tools, all that stuff, multiplied by a rate of return. So total expenses are a pass-through. There's no markup on there. Return on rate base does have a markup. That's that rate of return. So in a sense, rate of return rate making rewards utilities for spending capital dollars, right? If a utility can spend $1 million on something, they're going to get that $1 million back over 30 years, right? That's return of capital. Then they're also going to get a rate of return, or a return on that capital, of anywhere from 8 to 12%. So there's an incentive under the rate of return rate making process to deploy capital, right? To expand your system, to renew the system. And it's not necessarily true that utilities make money by selling energy. That in this model, the utility actually makes money or makes profit by investing capital. They charge for the energy they receive, or charge for the energy that they deliver, but that's really to compensate them for their capital expense. And there's a lot of reasons for this and a lot of history, and we'll touch on that in a future session. But this is why and how energy prices changed in the past. They for the supply portion of the bill, they changed because the level of pass-through expenses to the utility and then the value of their rate base changed, right? It wasn't necessarily tied to the value of the energy. It was the value of the capital that had been deployed by the utility. Well, over time that led to some problems, led to some very high utility costs that some on the call today might remember from the 70s, 80s, and into the early 90s. Illinois, comparatively to our region, had some of the highest utility costs in our region. And it really ate into our ability to compete for the manufacturing sector to compete. So during that period of time, especially accelerating into the 1990s, the whole idea of deregulation came into vogue. And you might remember back then that there was quite a bit of deregulation occurring in the 80s and 90s. There was deregulation of the trucking industry, deregulation of the railroads, deregulation of the airlines, deregulation of telecommunication, right? So energy was in that basket as well. And Illinois, along with all the other states that are not light gray on this map, implemented some sort of deregulation, or it's also called choice. And the whole idea of choice was, let's get the utilities out of the power plant business. Let's let them manage the wires and the meters and the billing, but let's have other parties compete in the generation sector. And maybe that will bring down costs, right? Again, this is about retail. This is about cost. So those states went ahead and they restructured their markets. So deregulation replaces utility-owned power plants, kind of at the top of this graph, with independent power producers, right? You might know the names of some of these independent power producers: Exelon, NRG, Calpine, right? And they now own the power plants, not the local utility. Local utilities divested. Deregulation also then introduced retail electricity suppliers, kind of a layer or two down on the graph, that are the entities that are now responsible for setting energy supply prices for consumers. So there's still rate of return rate making for the utilities, but that's just on their wires and delivery, right? It's not for the power plants anymore. They sold those power plants, they're out of the power plant business. So they're not responsible anymore for operating those plants. Additionally, if a consumer wants to get a price for electricity, now the preferred path is for that consumer to go through a retail electricity supplier. And there's a number of them. I think there's over 100 of them in Illinois now. And they have the ability to purchase electricity from the wholesale market and sell that electricity to the retail consumer. Now, just a point of clarification, this applies only to the investor-owned utilities in Illinois: Commonwealth Edison, Ameren Illinois, and Mid-American Energy. This did not apply automatically to cooperatives and municipal electric agencies. Per the statute, those last two categories, co-ops and municipal electric agencies, could elect to do this, but to my knowledge, none of them have done so. So let's just think about how this now works for different types of customers. So customer A, that is the factory down in the bottom left-hand corner. That industrial customer, if they're large enough, and we're talking really, really big, they can still get electricity delivered through the local utility company, ComEd, but they have an option where they can go directly to a power plant and structure a transaction that gets a price just for them. That electricity is delivered through the regional transmission organization to the local utility, and from the local utility to that factory. They can do that. They don't have to, but they can. Let's look under B. there is the option for consumers, residential and small consumers, can still get their electricity supply at a fixed price through the local utility. But the price that is set there is going to be set through a process managed through the Illinois Power Agency in Illinois. And again, the utility isn't doing anything but buying that power under the direction of a plan established by the Illinois Power Agency and approved by the Illinois Commerce Commission to purchase energy from the regional transmission organization. And that's why even the residential rate in Illinois changes annually, because the power price within the wholesale market changes all the time. So that's another option. A small consumer can choose not to choose, right? If they don't choose anything, they get a retail rate that's set through the IPA process. The preferred path for most consumers, both residential, commercial, and industrial, is to purchase through a retail energy supplier. And that retail energy supplier is going to contract with and receive supply, variable price supply from the RTO or the ISO, the wholesale market. They might also blend in some purchases from a power plant directly. They have a lot of options, but they too can then sell that electricity to a consumer through a contracted price. Most of those prices are available for up to 3 to 5 years maximum, and they are subject to change. But this is the new structure, and yes, it is a bit more complicated, but it's important to understand that that the changing rates on the wholesale market somehow have to be converted into less volatile prices for the consumer market, and that's really the job of the retail energy suppliers. So what do retail energy suppliers offer to customers? Well, these are just some representations of different price offers to consumers in Illinois that are served by Commonwealth Edison, Ameren Illinois, or Mid-American Energy. A consumer could basically get wholesale energy price called an LMP, or a locational marginal price, that changes every hour. A retail energy supplier can just pass that through. And it has a lot of risk, a lot of volatility for the customer, but it's a way of looking directly into the wholesale market and receiving that wholesale market price. Great. If you can tolerate the risk, that might be a good option. In my experience, most consumers don't like that. Most consumers that I deal with prefer a fixed price. They want that price to be stable for all the electricity they need. They want to know, from a budget standpoint, I'm buying my electricity for 7 cents a kilowatt hour. Great. So I don't care if electricity prices change because there's a heat wave, a cold wave, power plants go out, natural gas prices go up. I don't care. I want the same price. Well, a retail energy supplier can do that. But just like insurance, the greater the certainty, the more insurance coverage you have, the less risk you're willing to take, the higher the price, right? So none of this is done for free. The retail energy supplier, again, is buying variable price, and they're selling fixed price in this arrangement. They're only getting so much money on that contract. So they need to be very careful about how they manage their risk to the wholesale market, because those prices can go up and down. So they need to charge that retail customer a high enough fixed price to cover their risk. Consumers can also layer in purchases. They can get very sophisticated about this, especially larger users. I advise, large commercial industrial customers on these types of transactions. And this, again, is just a different way of managing exposure to those variable rates in the wholesale market and trying to get the highest level of price certainty at the lowest price, right? So that's what a lot of people like me do on a day-to-day basis. We're hedgers. So what happens when a consumer doesn't want to have a supplier in Illinois? To start at the top, you've got all consumers. All the consumers with a retail supplier, they've already got their fixed price, right? They already negotiated a price. If you don't have a retail supplier over on the right, and you are a residential or small commercial customer, you can get a fixed priced offer from the Illinois Power Agency. That's always an option. If, however, you are a large commercial or industrial customer and you don't have a retail energy supply contract, If you choose not to choose, then your option is index price, meaning that you get the wholesale price from PJM. That's your only other option. Again, you're always going to get your electricity, whether you have a retail supplier or not. It's always going to be reliable because that's all managed by PJM. It's just a question of how much are you going to pay for it, right? So that's really the bottom line of the retail market. What am I going to pay for this? Reliability is handled at a regional level, and at by the wholesale market, it's handled by the local utility through their distribution system. So really, this entire retail deregulation or choice issue gets down to what's the price I'm going to pay for the kilowatt hours and kilowatts that I consume. So I have some conclusions here. I'm just going to touch on them quickly, but just as a review, wholesale energy markets involve sales between generators and resellers. The focus is reliability in the wholesale market. There are organized markets like PJM that secure generation on long-term contracts through the capacity market, and then short-term for day-ahead, real-time, and ancillary markets. The prices for those supply change all the time, and that's why there's price volatility in the wholesale market. Switching over to retail energy markets, those involve sales between resellers and consumers, right? People like us. I'm sorry, I have a typo here. I'll have to correct it. The focus of the retail market is cost. Reliability is assumed. The deregulated retail market, like in Illinois, allows consumers served by investor-owned utilities to select their own supplier. It's not the case with municipal electric agencies and cooperatives. Retail suppliers purchase variable rate energy from the wholesale market, and then they sell partially or fully fixed rates to consumers. And then lastly, retail energy suppliers are really selling a price hedge. Again, like insurance, they're not selling energy. They don't produce energy, most of them. They don't own power plants. Those are different entities called independent power producers. But they do provide a function, they do provide a service, and there's a lot of them. So in the end, in markets like ours, it's up to the consumer to take the initiative to do their shopping and determine which option is best available to them, be that a default rate or a rate that is offered from a retail energy supplier. And I think with that, we're open to discussion and questions, and I appreciate your time and attention, and happy to respond for the next few minutes. I went a little long, sorry about that.
Mark, this is Edith, and if you would, we have 2 operational questions, and you can go back to the slides if you want to. So we're going to address the 2 simple ones, and one from Nick. I'll just ask you about that. If you could explain the hertz. So on the one of the graphs, you've got hertz, and Alderman Mike Bruno explained it as cycles per second. So just
Right.
Yeah, cycles of
correct.
what per second? What does that mean?
It's just the think about it as I'm trying to think about it. This is how I keep it in my mind. It's kind of a pulse rate, right? Electricity operates in waves, and the frequency is just maintaining a certain consistency in the pulse of the system. And in the United States, it's 60 hertz. In Europe, it's 50 hertz, right? So it's just the number is not so important, 50 or 60. It's maintaining a tolerance around that target, because all of your appliances, all of your equipment, from your blender all the way up to a chiller for a commercial office building, they are designed to operate based on a steady frequency from the grid, right? So think about it that way. Think about it as a regular pulse rate for the grid. I hope that helps.
Sure. Another clarifying question is from Robert Wagner. It looks like some grids are not totally contiguous and have some areas that are not connected. How is that possible?
Right. So Northern Illinois is part of PJM, and it's not contiguous to the PJM market. Most of the PJM market, same thing for parts of Southwest Michigan and Northeastern Indiana. They're connected by transmission lines. So they don't have to be physically proximate, but they do need to have connectivity through high voltage transmission lines.
Okay, thank you. And I'm gonna, so there's a question that's a little more thoughtful, I guess, or you might have an easy answer for this from Gary Holm. Can you further explain how inverter-based generators can't support the grid and that synchronous generators are needed to keep the grid stable?
Well, a couple things. Inverter-based assets, they can help support the grid to a certain extent, primarily through supply. But because they don't have a mechanical generation process, meaning that they don't have a generator that's spinning, they don't contribute to frequency regulation. I'm sorry, it's very difficult for them to contribute to maintaining the frequency on the grid. Now, some assets like batteries can be used to maintain frequency regulation, and they do, and they're very good at it. But from a long duration standpoint, most of that comes from a system inertia, term I've seen, that really comes from spinning type of generation on the grid. So there would need to be changes to the grid to enhance and ensure frequency if all the generation was being sourced from inverter-based resources.
Okay. Let's see, looks like there's a question from Mark Berger and from Laura Dirk. So Mark, do you want to ask your question in live? You can come on camera and off mute.
Hey, Mark.
Mark?
I've always wondered about the conundrum of big, used to be called industrial electricity users who shop around for the cheapest rates. And they just want cheap electricity. They don't care how much it costs to generate. So we have kind of like the interesting thing called the economic development rate, which essentially means you subsidize electricity for the big users, or at least, that's what I think it is. How is that worked out in terms of figuring out the cost of power and what rates to charge?
Right. So So there still are economic development rates. I think it's called rider EDR in the ComEd book. Gas utilities do kind of the same thing. But the EDR, it doesn't set a supply rate. It sets a discount to the distribution costs for that customer. So in the old days, there used to be an economic development rate that did discount supply. Because ComEd is out of the supply business now, they don't own that generation. A large data center, say, needs to go and find their own supply, directly with a generator or through a retail energy supplier, and they get their delivery service from ComEd. They can still get a discount on their ComEd service. The thesis is, hey, you're you're a big energy user. You're going to have some jobs coming along with that energy as well. So we're going to support economic development, and we're going to give you an incentive for coming here. But that incentive is purely on the distribution charges for that customer.
Okay, thanks. Like what you're doing.
Oh, thanks.
And we are in our last minute. So Laura, if you're ready to ask your question, can you go live here?
Yeah, I'm so confused about utilities. I was thinking about my Monopoly game, and like if you landed on them, you had to buy them. So when you use the term investor owned, is that true of every utility in the country, that they are investor owned, and so profit, like excess revenues or profit, is the goal?
Not all of them. There's typically maybe a different way of thinking about it. This is how I keep it straight. There is private sector and public sector utilities. The private sector utilities tend to be what are also called investor owned. So that's Commonwealth Edison, that's Northern Indiana Public Service Company, that's and the like, right? They sell stock. They're owned by private entities, and they're regulated by the state Public Utility Commission. There are public utilities that are typically, in my mind, I refer to them as municipal utilities, such as Batavia, Naperville, Winnetka, and then electrical cooperatives, which tend to be in the more rural regions of the state, so Corn Belt, Prairie Power, Inc., and the like. They are either member-owned or owned by the municipality. And, in terms of your question about profit, the private sector entities are obligated. They sell stock. They have a responsibility to generate profit. The publicly owned entities are not necessarily obligated to generate profit, but they do produce benefits for their communities or their owners, if they're member-owned cooperative, for instance. So I think there is, maybe you can call that profit, but I don't think it's necessarily the same as for those private sector companies like Commonwealth Edison. Did that help?
Very, and just a follow-up question about deregulation. Did it truly result in prices being more consistent and less, or more affordable in those really high cost areas?
The prices came down in Illinois, and now we're kind of middle of the pack regionally from a cost standpoint. All of our surrounding states decided not to do deregulation. So some people point to that as an example of deregulation working. I think it's arguable. And maybe we'll touch on it in a future class. I don't think it's settled yet, even 20 years later. So I'm done.
It's
And a
That
great
was like
job
the-
as always, Mark. Thank you
like the
very much.
bouncer at the door. So-
Yeah, exactly. Mr. Pruitt, Edith, Cheryl, thank you all, and especially those attending. Thank you very much for your time. We hope you enjoyed this latest Lunch and Learn, and we look forward to seeing you again as we progress toward that ever valuable and incontrovertible certificate. Right, Mark?
Oh, suitable for framing.
Suitable for framing, yes,
Yeah.
indeed. So
Yeah.
go have a good Wednesday, everybody. Be safe, stay warm.
Take care. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.